The movie begins with Ted. He is a professor at a very prestigious university. He reflects on his years at this institute. At the end of one his classes, a young student by the name of Angela asks to come talk to him before class tomorrow. He agrees. Minutes later, he goes to meet his wife at the hospital, Sherry. She is a doctor. He tries to get some action, but she has a patient to take case as soon as possible. The next morning, Angela calls Ted, who is still at home. She reminds him they have a meeting that he forgot about. Ted then hurries to the university and invites to his office. Angela reveals to him that his book saved her life after her father passed. She is a huge fan of his work. He is happy to hear it. She then reveals that she is also working on a novel called Eggs and gives him the first pages for him to read. He accepts it, and she is so excited to know that the famous Ted will read her work. Later that day, Ted is working on his next book when he gets a call from his editor waiting for the book to be finished. But he hangs up on him and decides to take a look at Angela's first pages. Days later, he catches up to her and reveals how he really enjoyed her work. Angela is over the moon and decides to give him more pages to read. She doesn't want to bother, but he doesn't mind. And days go by as he reads her next pages. One day, Ted meets with a coworker named Magda, and she wonders how is Angela's book doing. She reveals to him that she read some of her past bookwork and it's very obscene. One in particular, called Angela 911, was about a girl named Angela being a prostitute. Both then debate if Angela was actually one in the past. But Magda tells him to be careful with her. The next day, he goes to buy Angela's last book, Angela 911. That same night, Ted and his wife Sherry go to a party with friends. They learn he is working on a new book. So they are eager to find out the name of this next book. He tells them the name is Eggs, which we know is actually the book Angela is writing. Sherry is surprised as she heard a different name before. The dinner then arrives and some of the professors talk about harassment for students in their school. One of them tells them how he always keeps the door open if he meets a girl student in his office. After the dinner, Ted keeps reading Angela's last book, Angela 911, he bought earlier with such focus. It's actually very dirty with a lot of making love. The next day after class, Angela gives him more pages to read. He reads it and it's very similar to what happened to him, an accident not long ago. He is very disturbed and calls her asking how did she come up with this story. She replies that it happened to one of her friends. The following day, Amy and Mark, Angela's parents, come to visit Ted for Parents' Day. Ted is surprised because she said her dad passed. So he confronts her afterwards and Angela tells him Mark is her stepfather. That same night, he is reading her next pages. It is so dirty that he imagines making love to her and he stops right away. He then crosses that part with a big red marker. The following day, Angela waits at his office when he arrives. He asks her when is he getting more of her pages. But she informs him that her hard drive broke and she can't write any more pages. She then asks him for a ride to buy it, but he refuses, suggesting her boyfriend to help her with it. But she replies, "I don't have a boyfriend." He then offers her a ride for tomorrow. She is excited. And just like that, he picks her up at her dorm and both head to the store where she buys the hard drive. Once they arrive back, she asks him to help her carry the hard drive to her room. He accepts. Minutes later, once the hard drive is installed, she tries to print the new pages, but it's bugging, so she gets frustrated. He comes near her to calm her down. He touches her and slowly the touching turns into making love. But right in the middle of it, he breaks one of his teeth and they stop. Ted then tells her to not tell it to anyone, it would get them both in deep trouble. He then goes back his wife and feels really ashamed. Later that night, he reads the new pages and again imagine himself making love to her. The poor Ted is slowly getting sucked into it. The next day, Angela lashes out at one of the other students, and they complain that why is she the only exempt from having her work judged on. After class, she reveals to him she was upset because he hasn't called her about the new pages. He apologizes. She then asks him to show his editor her new book. He responds that he will think about it. The next day, the students finally analyze Angela's book Eggs and they all say it was terrible. They call it the worst book ever. Angela is almost in tears, so Ted steps up and tells them what she has written is better than anything they have written. He then storms out as the class is quiet. He calls his editor right away, he wants to talk to him. Later that day, he goes home and Ruby, his daughter, came to visit. She gets into an argument with her dad. She thinks he should have seek therapy because his dad killed himself by fire. Days later, Ted flies to New York to meet with his editor Len. He tells him about Eggs, which is a story of a student making love to her professor. But Len isn't interested in Angela's book. Ted then flies back to his house where Sherry announces that one of his students called Angry. It was Angela. The next day, he bumps into her. She is in a bad mood. She asks about what did his editor say about her book. He tells her that Len didn't want to read it. Angela then tells him, "Screw you." He is shocked as she tells him why hasn't he fought harder for her book. She then reveals to him that the only reason she let him make love to her was because she wanted her book to be published. But Ted is in disbelief that she used him. He thought they had a real thing going. The next day, the chairman of the university calls Ted to his office and shows him an audio recording. It was the conversation he had with Angela the day before. They can hear when she said she let him make love to him. He reveals that Angela is threatening to sue the school for sexual harassment. He advises him to resign immediately. Ted tells him this is not harassment and slams the door, leaving. Hours later, he looks at his wife and invites Sherry for dinner. He feels the storm coming, so his idea is to deliver her the horrible news before it comes to her. The night arrives and he indeed delivers the news. Sherry is shocked and gets mad at him. He tries to calm down the situation, saying it wasn't Angela in his mind but her book. Sherry then says, "So you were making love to a book?" She now sees him like a vampire sucking on young blood to get her book published. He then announces she is filing an harassment lawsuit against him. Sherry responds, "Great, I hope she wins." The following day, she moves out of their house. Days go by. Ted is alone and depressed. One night, he gets a call from Ruby. She is mad at her father for what he did to her mom. She then hangs up. Days later, the university starts its investigation on what happened. Angela tells a bunch of lies and she reveals that Len, Ted's editor, called her last week and offered her a contact for her new book Eggs. Ted is in disbelief. During the interrogations, everyone is mean to Ted while being so nice to Angela, which they see as a victim. We then jump to 15 months later. Ted is in a coffee shop writing his new book inspired to the events that just happened to him. He then sees a lady sitting next to him reading the book Eggs. He asks her how is the book and the movie end.